Identify the man?
Of course, we hope so, but at this point, we really don't know.
That was over 3 decades ago, but now...
Hey, we have enough information. We can move forward on this case. Let's see where this takes us.
Detectives down in Plano, Texas, reopened an abduction and sexual assault case on an 8-year-old from 1991.
Trust. It's what allows parents to let their children play outside, walk to school, or visit the neighborhood pool. But what happens when that trust is shattered? When the simple act of helping someone find a lost dog becomes the beginning of a nightmare? In the quiet suburbs of Texas, 2 communities would face this horrifying reality. 2 young girls separated by 8 years and 20 miles would fall victim to a predator who knew exactly how to exploit innocence. Their stories would haunt investigators for decades, leaving families to wonder if the monster who destroyed their children's lives was still out there, perhaps living next door, waiting to strike again. For over 30 years, he walked free. No one suspected the quiet man from Oklahoma could be harboring such dark secrets. But secrets have a way of surfacing no matter how deeply they're buried. This is the story of how justice finally caught up with a predator who thought he had gotten away with his crimes.
I remember being horrified that somebody could be taken from our alley, which as a kid, we were up and down all the time.
But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask you a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensure you don't miss out on any new videos. Plano, Texas, 1991. A suburban paradise where kids rode their bikes freely through tree-lined streets and neighbors knew each other by name. Parents felt safe letting their children walk to the community pool, a common summer activity that no one thought twice about. That sense of security was about to be shattered in ways the community could never have imagined. It began like any other summer day. An 8-year-old girl was making her way through a familiar alley, headed to the neighborhood pool, when a car pulled up beside her. The driver, a man she didn't know, rolled down his window with what seemed like an innocent request. He needed help finding his lost dog. It's the kind of scenario parents had warned their children about, but in the moment, even the most cautious child could be caught off guard. Within seconds, the man's demeanor changed. "You're coming with me," he said, grabbing the young girl and forcing her into his vehicle. The peaceful afternoon erupted into chaos. Neighbors, realizing something was terribly wrong, immediately sprang into action. They went door to door, desperately gathering information, while others contacted the police.
The neighbors immediately started going door to door, were in contact with the police. Crime Watch was out everywhere, trying to get information.
But she was already miles away. 5 agonizing hours passed before the girl was found in Garland, Texas. She had appeared at a local home, seeking help, traumatized by an ordeal that no child should ever experience. Medical examination would later confirm the devastating truth. She had been sexually assaulted. The young girl's swimsuit would provide crucial evidence, though at the time, no one knew just how important it would become. Police worked quickly to piece together what happened. Based on the victim's description, they created composite sketches of her attacker. These drawings would become haunting reminders of the predator who had invaded their community. A man described as having distinct features that seemed burned into the memory of his young victim. The sketches were distributed throughout the area, posted in stores, shared in newspapers, but the man remained elusive. Mary Peebles, a resident of the neighborhood at the time, later recalled the horror that gripped the community. It was horrifying that someone was taken from this alley. she said. At the time, we were up and down all the time. The incident transformed the neighborhood overnight. Parents who once felt secure letting their children play outside now kept them under close watch. The simple act of walking to the pool became a source of anxiety and fear. Despite the intense investigation and community response, leads began to dry up. The composite sketches generated numerous tips, but none led to the perpetrator. As weeks turned into months, the case grew cold, but the impact on the community remained. The incident had permanently altered how residents viewed their safety, their neighbors, and the vulnerability of their children. What no one knew then was that this attack wasn't an isolated incident. The predator would strike again, using the same tactics to prey on another young victim. But for now, a community was left to grapple with the unsettling reality that the man who had committed this heinous crime was still out there, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting to strike again. 8 years passed. The terror that had gripped Plano had faded into an uneasy memory. Parents still warned their children about strangers, but the immediate fear had dulled with time. 20 miles away in Dallas, however, history was about to repeat itself in a way that would send chills down the spines of investigators who remembered the 1991 case. In 1999, another young girl, this time 9 years old, was walking alone in Dallas. The scenario that unfolded was eerily familiar. A man in a vehicle asking for help. The same manipulation of childhood innocence. The same sudden shift from friendly stranger to predator. And tragically, the same devastating outcome. Just like in Plano, the community mobilized immediately. Search parties formed, police canvassed neighborhoods, and families held their children closer. The similarities to the Plano case were striking, but at the time, investigators had no way to connect the two incidents. After all, they were separated by 8 years and occurred in different jurisdictions. The attacker had been clever, choosing locations just far enough apart to avoid raising immediate suspicions. Dallas police worked the case aggressively, collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. They developed their own composite sketch of the suspect, unaware that it bore a haunting resemblance to the one created in Plano years earlier. Once again, evidence was carefully preserved, including DNA samples that would prove crucial in the years to come. The impact on the Dallas community mirrored what had happened in Plano. Parents who had felt secure in their neighborhoods now viewed every stranger with suspicion. Children were no longer allowed to walk alone. The carefree atmosphere of the community had been poisoned by fear and distrust. As with the Plano case, initial leads in Dallas went nowhere. The attacker seemed to vanish as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind another traumatized child and another community, wrestling with the knowledge that a predator walked free among them. 2 separate cities, 2 devastating crimes, 2 investigations hitting dead ends. But unknown to everyone at the time, one perpetrator watching, waiting, and believing he had gotten away with it all. What investigators didn't realize then was that these 2 cases, seemingly isolated incidents, would eventually be linked through evidence that had been meticulously preserved. But that revelation was still years away. And in the meantime, 2 communities lived with the unsettling question: would he strike again? By 2004, both cases had grown cold. The young victims were now teenagers, their communities had adapted to a new normal of heightened vigilance, and the perpetrator likely thought he was in the clear. But a new tool in criminal investigation was about to reveal what detectives had long suspected but couldn't prove. These attacks were connected. The Plano Police Department decided to submit evidence from the 1991 case to CODIS, a relatively new system at the time that allowed law enforcement to compare DNA evidence across jurisdictions. When they ran the DNA collected from the young victim's swimsuit, they got a hit, but not to a person. Instead, the system matched the DNA to evidence from the 1999 Dallas assault.
There was no match to an actual person, but there was a match to another case.
For investigators, this was a breakthrough that brought both hope and frustration. Finally, they had concrete proof that the same predator had committed both crimes. The similar tactics weren't just coincidence. It was the same man, methodically selecting his victims, waiting years between attacks to avoid detection. But while they now knew both cases were linked, they still couldn't identify the attacker. His DNA wasn't in any criminal database. He remained a ghost, his identity hidden behind matching genetic codes that led nowhere. The connection energized both departments. Detectives from Plano and Dallas began sharing notes, comparing witness statements, and reviewing old leads with fresh eyes. They re-examined the composite sketches from both cases, noting the striking similarities that now made perfect sense. The portrait of their suspect became clearer, a calculated predator who knew how to target vulnerable victims and evade capture. But despite this new collaboration and mountain of evidence, the perpetrator's identity remained elusive. The DNA match confirmed their worst fears about a serial predator while simultaneously highlighting their inability to catch him. Somewhere out there, perhaps still in Texas, perhaps watching the investigation unfold, was a man who had attacked 2 young girls and walked free for over a decade. The question wasn't just who he was anymore, but whether he had struck again in the years since 1999, leaving more victims and evidence waiting to be connected.
Certainly if he was doing this in our area, there's probably areas in Oklahoma that, maybe want to look through their cases as well.
For the time being, justice would have to wait. But the DNA connection had established a crucial link that would eventually prove vital in unraveling this decades-old mystery. The predator might have thought time was on his side, but science and determination were slowly closing in. Nearly 20 years after connecting the 2 cases, Plano police decided to take another look. It was 2023, and investigative techniques had advanced considerably since their last major breakthrough. The evidence that had been so carefully preserved in 1991 and 1999 was about to reveal its final secrets. Using funding from the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, detectives partnered with specialized labs that could extract more information from the decades-old DNA samples. The technology that had once only been able to match cases could now do something remarkable: trace family connections and build genetic family trees that might lead to their suspect. As investigators worked through this new analysis, a pattern began to emerge. The family tree they constructed pointed them toward a name that had never before surfaced in their investigation: Nicholas Ray Carney. But they couldn't move too quickly. A mistake now could spook their suspect and destroy their chance at justice. Detectives learned that Carney, now 64 years old, was living quietly in Ardmore, Oklahoma, just north of the Texas border. His location made perfect sense, close enough to have committed the crimes in Texas, far enough to avoid connection to them. But they needed current DNA to confirm their suspicions. A surveillance operation was launched. Investigators began watching Carney's movements, waiting for opportunities to collect items he discarded in public spaces. Every cigarette butt, every soda can could be the key to confirming their theory. They had to be patient, methodical, and above all, discreet. If Carney realized he was under investigation, decades of work could be undone in an instant. The surveillance team's patience paid off. They successfully collected items Carney had discarded, carefully documenting each step to ensure the evidence would hold up in court. When the DNA results came back, there was no doubt they had finally found their man. The DNA from Carney's discarded items was a perfect match to both the 1991 and 1999 cases. For the first time in over 3 decades, investigators could put a name and face to the predator who had terrorized 2 communities. They could see his driver's license photo from 1996, and the resemblance to the composite sketches was undeniable. The man who had hidden in plain sight for so long was about to face justice. But they weren't done yet. With the identity confirmed, investigators now faced a crucial challenge, coordinating between multiple jurisdictions to ensure Carney couldn't slip away. The arrest had to be planned perfectly. After waiting 33 years for justice, they couldn't afford any mistakes. On December 19, 2024, a seemingly ordinary Thursday in Ardmore, Oklahoma, justice finally caught up with Nicholas Ray Carney. Oklahoma Highway Patrol officers, working in coordination with Texas authorities, spotted their target traveling on Highway 70. After more than 3 decades of freedom, Carney's time was up. The arrest was swift and methodical. The man who had eluded the capture for 33 years offered no resistance. To onlookers, he might have appeared to be just another ordinary 64-year-old being pulled over on a winter day. But the officers knew different. They were finally face to face with the predator who had terrorized young girls in Texas and haunted investigators for decades. In a twist of irony, Carney had been living just across the Texas border, almost hiding in plain sight. His life in Ardmore had been unremarkable, exactly the kind of existence that allowed him to avoid detection for so long. But now, as he was taken into custody, his carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The news of Carney's arrest sent shockwaves through both Plano and Dallas. Jennifer Chapman of the Plano Police Department spoke about the profound impact of finally solving these cases. It's deeply satisfying to be able to tell the victim, I know who your offender is, and he is going to face justice and be held accountable, she stated. For the first time in over 3 decades, victims could put a name and face to the man who had caused them so much trauma. As Carney was processed at the Carter County Jail, investigators were already building their case. He faced charges of aggravated sexual assault of a child, with the possibility of additional charges as the investigation continued. The evidence against him was substantial, not just the DNA matches, but also his striking resemblance to the composite sketches created decades ago. Detective Tim Braun and Detective Danny Baldwin, who had worked tirelessly on the case, weren't celebrating yet. Their investigation had revealed a disturbing possibility. Given the 8-year gap between the known attacks and Carney's decades of freedom, there could be more victims out there. If he was doing this in our area, Chapman noted, there's probably areas in Oklahoma that may want to look through their cases as well. The arrest brought a mix of emotions for the victims and their families. Relief that their attacker had finally been caught, anger at the justice system's slow pace, and hope that other potential victims might now feel empowered to come forward. For the communities of Plano and Dallas, it was proof that no matter how much time had passed, justice could still be served. But investigators aren't closing the book on him just yet. The 8-year gap between his known attacks raises disturbing questions about potential victims in both Texas and Oklahoma. Law enforcement agencies across both states are now reviewing cold cases that match his method of operation, wondering if the man who evaded capture for so long might be responsible for other unsolved crimes. For the communities of Plano and Dallas, Carney's arrest brought a bittersweet form of closure. The man who had haunted their neighborhoods for decades was finally behind bars, but the scars he left run deep. Mary Peebles, who lived near the site of the 1991 attack, reflected on its lasting impact. I don't think it'll ever be forgotten. It's kind of a landmark in that it changed people's behavior. The victims, now adults, can finally put a face to the monster who attacked them. For investigators like Jennifer Chapman, being able to deliver that news made decades of persistence worthwhile. To be able to tell a victim, that their attacker has been caught after all these years. That's why we never give up, she said. But this case leaves us with chilling questions to consider. How many other predators are still walking free among us, believing they've escaped justice? How many cold cases could be solved with today's technology? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how many victims are still waiting for their chance at justice? If you want more true crime stories about cases that seemed unsolvable until science caught up with the criminal, make sure to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments. What cold case do you think deserves a fresh look with modern technology?